Hey guys, welcome back to Hush Harbor, a space that's rooted in faith and centered in women and liberating truths. So today we're talking about a name that carries centuries of weight, and that's Jezebel. So she's one of the Bible's most infamous women, a queen, foreigner, a symbol of idolatry, seduction, and rebellion. And for many, her name still echoes a warning. But what if we misunderstood her? What if the story that we inherited of Jezebel says more about power, patriarchy, and fear of female agency than it does of her? So, in this episode, we're going to delve into Jezebel's story through the lens of womanist theology, a theology rooted in lived experiences, struggles, and spiritual wisdom of Black women. And we're going to ask the questions: who gets to tell the story? Who benefits from the way it's told? And how can reclaiming the voice of Jezebel help us reimagine justice, divinity, and the sacred feminine? So take a deep breath and open your heart and get ready because today we're flipping the script. And ooh, music, music. You like the music I just made? So a quick recap before we move on. So if you're new to Hush Harbor or new to Womanist theology centers the experience of Black women engaging in scripture through the lens of race, gender, and culture. Womanist theology insists on an intersectional approach, considering how Black women have uniquely been oppressed and marginalized within both church and society. So, the first question we're going to talk about is who was Jezebel according to biblical texts, and how was her story traditionally been interpreted? So, I'll go first. So, of course, Jezebel was, on surface, Phoenician princess, wife of King Ahab of Israel. She was an outsider in Israel, of course. And of course, from what I've heard growing up, she was manipulative. She was sexually immoral. She was just the quintessential evil queen. Um, so she's also portrayed as an example of what happens when women seek power. So if you know anything about the story of Jezebel, she was ultimately thrown out of the window to her death after she was taunting Jehu, who was tasked with overthrowing the house of Ahab, and she was eventually eaten by dogs. So one of the things that I always pay special attention to was Second Kings chapter 9, 30 through 31, when it talks about how she was approached by Jehu. So she put on her eye makeup, she arranged her hair, and she looked out the window. So as he entered, she said, Have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master?" So if you know anything about the past, Zimri was a traitor who actually did murder his master, and he died, I'm pretty sure, in a horrible fire by himself. So I take that, even though, we pay special attention to the fact that she put on makeup and did her hair, but I always take it that she was, coming with all the sass to call someone a traitor, knowing that they're probably about to kill you. And if I know I'm gonna die, I want to die looking good.
Mhm.
But I digress. So we can go on to the next question. So, have you or others you've known ever wrestled with the Jezebel figure, like personally or spiritually?
Who wants to go
Um,
first?
I can go first. So, I would definitely say yes, spiritually and yes, physically. So, Jezebel is synonymous with makeup and jewelry and like flamboyancy. So, a lot of times in the Christendom, like women are supposed to be more meek and mild and modest. So, wearing red lipstick, that has been a thing in church where, they don't want women to wear red lipstick, especially,
Mhm.
any type of makeup that's very flamboyant. Like now everyone's wearing makeup, everyone's beat. They got a full face, that that's what some people consider like a Jezebel spirit, like wearing earrings, I was not allowed to
Hmm.
get my ears pierced until I was 13 years old. So wearing earrings is a Jezebel spirit. That's what people would say. Like wearing very flamboyant jewelry. Like I like to wear rings, so I always have multiple rings on. People say like that's a Jezebel spirit. You should only have your wedding ring on. So a lot of the things that I think are natural things that women typically do and we gravitate towards, seem like that was associated with the Jezebel spirit. And I would say definitely, just the things we wear, showing more skin, showing your figure. Unfortunately, nowadays, like bodycon is a type of style of dress
Mhm.
for women. So bodycon meaning like it's going to show your body. It's contouring your body. So those dresses are, I guess, they would be considered a Jezebel spirited attire, if to say the
Mhm.
least. But so things that I would typically wear, because that's just a style I like. That was the aesthetic I like. Would I guess for some people would be considered, more Jezebel esque. And I think, in my past, I probably have like fought with that spiritual side where it's like, am I supposed to be doing this? Am I supposed to be doing that? If I'm wearing a long, flowy dress, is this, more modest? But then is my behavior still, more of a Jezebel? Because you can be extremely modest, but then you still have that spirit within you that, kind of, provocative, spirit. So, I could like just unbutton my, thing a little bit more and be like, hey, so, I just feel like that spirit, it's within all of us, men and women.
Yeah.
So I don't want people to just think like that's just synonymous with women showing their bodies. I mean, it's men, it can be men as well. Just
Um,
according to what they say. So I know we are kind of contradict what we know about Jezebel, but that's what I've learned,
Yeah.
throughout my history and my learning through school and college, going to a Christian college, and then also with church. But yeah, I feel like that spirit can be reside within us if you're saying it's a spirit, you know.
And the crazy thing is, like, when they talk about this Jezebel spirit, is it all the stuff that they talk about is none of the stuff that she actually did. Like, if you're
yeah,
saying a
Mhm.
Jezebel spirit and you got people to murder the prophets, then I'm like, yeah, that's the Jezebel spirit. She did
Right.
that. And if like you're like, yeah, you serve another God besides, the God that one God that we believe in, then I'm like, that's that
That
Jezebel spirit. You believe
right.
in
yeah,
multiple gods. Yep, that's her. But it's like all of this stuff has just been like used to basically shame and control us to like, you know, if someone calls you a Jezebel, you're like, oh my gosh, how
Mhm.
could you call me that? But it's like
yeah,
this woman was arguably like one of the most powerful women in the Bible. So it's like if you're saying I'm a Jezebel, like I take it you're saying I'm powerful because I don't have any lipstick on. So I mean I'm gonna might do my hair if I'm trying to look cute, but
Mhm.
yeah,
other than that, I always thought it was so weird that like people would be like, a Jezebel spirit. And when you look at controlling narratives for Black women, that's one of the controlling narratives is the Jezebel.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Actually, that's what I was going to say. It all stemmed from a stereotype that was rooted in slavery. So, like, they hypersexualize, Black women. They say that we're too loud, we're too much, we're too angry, versus to us being bold and strategic, etc. And that's basically how they did Jezebel, because she spoke her mind and she did not, wasn't submissive to whatever their ways were. Then she was seen as problematic versus to a strong woman, which they could not handle that at that time because they wanted us to be silent. And then they started like, the stereotype with that it was more so towards for women of color, like to control us, having us think because we wear, I just started wearing red lipstick, by the way, but they started
Mhm. Look at that.
control,
Let's
using
go,
that as
Jezebel.
the control. When I started, really studying this, I was like, you know what? Yes, I am gonna put on my red lipstick because, like, who are you to even, say that I cannot wear XYZ? It's nowhere in any biblical language that says that. And when I started reading and learning and from the theological stuff myself, I was like, okay, so none of this is, so this was to control me the whole time. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. Okay.
So, how do you guys think if we use like as women as theologians, do you think we can actually really reinterpret the story of Jezebel in light of the race and gender and power dynamics that we know now? Do you think it's even possible to really do that?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that was most powerful for me in rereading her story and reconceptualizing her perspective on things, right? So she wasn't just the wife of the king, right? She was the daughter of a king. She was a princess. She had power, and it's that power from just being raised in power. Um, her trying to introduce Baal to the people of Israel, of course, they're going to see it as an attack on their own religion, but she's just trying to make them more progressive. She's trying to help their society in her eyes from her point of things. And I think that that's something to always take into consideration because when I'll use my own personal experience, whenever I not was called Jezebel, but whenever I was punished for questioning things, whenever I was ignored or silenced because I'm like, well, this doesn't really seem like the right way of doing things. I was raised Adventist. For anyone who's not familiar with that, if you know Jehovah's Witness, we're basically like twins, kind of literally because we started out on the same branch and we just branched off into different directions. So very conservative, sort of Christian mindset. Very much that like no jewelry, no nothing. There's like a whole covenant that you have to promise to when you get baptized into the religion of all the things that you're not going to do. I've broken all of those rules. But in my quest to question, because we were encouraged to question, it's like you want to learn more about the Bible, you want to learn more about Christianity and the religion that you're going into, you need to be able to ask those questions. But when I would ask those questions, I would get pushed back. When I would ask why there isn't any progress, why we aren't doing things the way it feels like it should be done, that's when I got a lot of pushback as well. And so in me reading about Jezebel, I saw a lot of, I saw every woman who has ever tried to push for change. I saw every woman who tried to enhance and encourage and uplift her community. And I saw the violence and the vitriol that those women would receive just for trying to make positive change because tradition says, no, that's not how we're going to do things. Everything is fine exactly the way it is, even if the world is burning. Um, and so I think that's a very important message to take from Jezebel, um, in light of everything.
And one thing that always stands out to me was when, because she, had prophets murdered, so did Elijah. But once that she heard that Elijah, what he did, she basically sent a messenger to him to basically threaten him, and he ran off.
Mhm.
So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what other woman in the Bible do you know that threatened someone and they ran off into the wilderness to basically kind of like starve? But it's
Yeah.
like, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to being visible. And she was a very visible woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they even blamed her for her husband converting and, worshiping other gods. So it's
Yeah.
like, for any woman, especially like in the biblical times, and even now when we talk about that Jezebel spirit, there's like being outspoken, like you were kind of talking about, and questioning stuff and refusing to be silent. Like there's always a cost to that. And I think with us like talking about this is like, reimagining it and kind of almost giving her a voice that she didn't have through reading the Bible in traditional lenses.
I honestly want to know, where did they even get the, how did they interpret what they interpreted and then preach it when it didn't even say any of that? It's just wild to me. And then you just keep passing it on and on and on and on and on. It's just
Well, I think
wild.
it's easier to have a story like that where you have someone that's in power, and then you can use that person as an example. And that was the issue with her. Like she was a princess. She did have power. If she was
Hmm.
probably a servant woman, this story wouldn't even be as big as as it is now. You
Right.
Yep.
probably wouldn't even know her name, but because she was in power, they used her as an example. And
Yep.
then so it's easy to sit there and use someone as an example and keep passing things down, just like people believe in Christopher Columbus for years. Like just like in the last decade, people are like, "Oh yeah, he really didn't discover the Americas because
Like, oh,
people were already here."
really?
Like, but we just consumed it and we
Yeah.
celebrated it, and it's easy to
Hmm.
just consume and consume instead of stopping to think like, "What am I eating?" You
Hmm.
know, so
Hmm.
you're choosing like the best of both worlds, I guess, or I don't say like good or evil, but that's what it is. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
do I just want to realize what I'm doing, or just keep on doing it? And it's easier just to keep on doing it, eating the fat, and you just spit out the rest.
But
Yeah.
you did capture exactly what they were doing with that dichotomy of good and evil, because you have Elijah, who's, the a prophet, I believe, and
Hmm.
have, Jezebel, who, someone, when we look at like how things are written, someone has to be against the good person.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's the good person in the thing, even though he was murdering a bunch of people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And essentially, he was the reason why she eventually got thrown out the window, even though he was dead. Even though he was dead
Mhm.
already, he was the start of the whole thing. So it's like you have to look at the whole thing of how everything goes. There's a good guy, there's a bad guy. There's Superman, there's Lex Luthor. There, if you're going to have a hero in Elijah, you have to have someone that he's going against to make him
Yeah.
even, rise even higher. Because even though they essentially did the same thing, they killed a bunch of prophets,
Mhm.
but we never hear about, like, I would never have known if I didn't do this, whole project, that Elijah did essentially the same thing, killed
Mhm.
a bunch of people. And then they were talking about it, the different things. Like, I would want to be in my religion, be like Jezebel, because she, even though she was in a foreign country, they believed in something totally different. She was not going to let anyone deter her from believing in what she believed in. And isn't
Yeah.
that what they always want us to do? Believe in what we, steadfast in our religion. So she was
Mhm.
Yeah.
steadfast in her religion, even though it wasn't what they wanted her to believe in.
You're not wrong, but in this instance, because and I think you brought up a really good point, is like you have the protagonist versus the antagonist. And so the main protagonist is Israel. And so you have to have the antagonist. And so if Jezebel was going to be like anyone in Israel's history, they would want her to be like oh gosh, why is her name slipping from me right now? The first woman who converted to become an Israelite. Oh geez. How am I already forgetting her name? I hate this. Ruth.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They would want Jezebel to be like Ruth. They would want her to let go of everything because you're a stranger coming into our tribe. And so because you are a stranger coming into our tribe, then you have to accept everything the exact same way that Ruth did. You have to embrace everything the way that Ruth did. I don't know on the timeline where they're at, but that I think would be the idea, or at least if we're talking just in modern terms, for modern tradition, that's what church leaders would want, right? It's just like, oh, if you're going to be this kind of person, you got to be like Ruth. You can't be like Jezebel because we don't want queens. We don't want women
Mhm.
who embrace their power. We want the stranger who gives up everything for her mother-in-law and then gives up everything for, a random cousin of her mother-in-law or her husband, however it was that worked out with Obed. Um, so I think that's something also to take into consideration. It's like there's always going to be some sort of stipulation with how they want the good guy versus the bad guy to win.
So how do you think the Jezebel stereotype, like with the hypersexualized Black woman, connect to the biblical figure? And like what damage do you think that has done, like historically and theologically, if any?
Hmm. That's a good question.
That's a very loaded question.
It sure is.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, I could go
If
first.
I could
So
add, oh, okay, no, you
go
go first.
ahead.
Okay, fine. Well, I was gonna say if I think one thing that I kind of nerded out on when I was reading everything is I was trying to figure out where the hypersexualization was coming from. And then I realized it had nothing to do with sex. It had everything to do with power, and how power was used depending on when it was used. So for Jezebel in her time period, the power was in her bloodline, the power was in her title. So as a princess becoming a queen, that's all she needed, right? She can beat her face, put the makeup on and everything. That's her armor. That's all she needs. She doesn't need anything else. So then for, going into slavery, going into, white supremacy and how it was using Christianity to put down Black people, put down every person of color. I think that a lot of the power that's being used, mainly, I mean, you can look at it from Mary Magdalene forward, is in sex.
Mhm.
Because that's how women were getting money. That's how women were getting influence. If they don't have, if they're not born into power, they use their bodies. And so if the church leaders are going to control the masses, they understand not everyone that's in our flock is a rich person. The majority of our flock are poor, and so the majority of our flock most likely are going to use their bodies to influence and gain power and do whatever they can, however they can in that way. So that's how I see that connecting.
That's deep. I like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely a different perspective that I wasn't even considering. Okay.
I
Snaps to
wrote a
you
lot of
there.
notes, guys.
Yeah.
So basically what Aerosol was saying, and then it just like, the whole stereotype just is used to dehumanize like Black women and, basically just reduce us to like the temptress, like everything. Like you could just be walking down the street and someone's like, oh my gosh, you're seducing me. And you're like, I'm just walking down the street, which
Mhm.
is basically, these like slave women, well, enslaved women, I'll say, they're just doing what they have to do, working in the fields or doing whatever they have to do in the house. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to just take that. So it's
Mhm.
like, but then you have to, rationalize it in your head. Well, she was wearing this, she was doing this. And then it's like when we talk about that, King Ahab was even converting from his religion, like, why else would he do it besides that she was offering him sex?
Mhm.
Because he couldn't have even fathomed in his mind to do that otherwise, that she was just seducing him into going with another religion.
right.
Right.
Although that's her husband. It's wild.
Hmm.
Didn't realize they had such a weak-willed king.
Yeah.
Sucks to suck.
Well, that's a part of like accountability. It's almost
Mhm.
like the Jezebel spirit is kind of like the scapegoat,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
so to speak. So it's like,
100%.
okay, you need the scapegoat, so you are not held to, be accountable. So there's no accountability on your part. So you can do whatever you want, have whatever you want. It's your world. And then you can say, like, oh, it's because of that spirit, that woman, that Jezebel, that scapegoat. And
Yeah.
we see that all the time, in current day events,
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we're using this scapegoat as a means to get away from accountability for what
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
our own actions.
Literally
Yeah.
from the beginning of the Bible.
Hmm.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Adam used
Yeah.
Eve as a scapegoat, and Eve said, "But the snake gave it to me."
Yeah.
Then Adam, the apple. Well,
Yep.
Eve told me to eat it.
I
You know
didn't know what
that.
it was.
So
Hmm.
maybe this Jezebel spirit is a scapegoat spirit, and it's been
Yeah.
there
Mhm.
the entire time,
The
Even
entire
when it
time.
comes down to the devil, like, people, I feel like you need something to blame for
Mhm. The
your
devil did it.
self-inflicted nonsense. So they blame sin on, they have to figure out something to say, oh, this is why I did that. Oh, that's why
Yes.
I was irresponsible. It's because of the devil. The devil made me do it. Or you did it and you need to take responsibilities for your own actions. And
Yep.
that's
You can't
okay.
properly repent otherwise.
And we're not saying, that there's not, you know, heaven and earth, hell and heaven. We're not saying, that like those things are not, happening or not, there. But at the same time, it's like us as humans, like we have the capability of being mindful beings,
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
God
God gave
gave
us
us
a
tools.
consciousness, like we
Yeah.
are mindful beings that we can be accountable for our own actions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then they definitely painted King Ahab as a very weak king. Like even one day he in the story, like he wouldn't eat. And it's because he couldn't get like a vineyard that was close to him. So basically Jezebel got this man killed so her husband could get the vineyard. So
Mhm.
it's like everything in the story is just built to make her
Hmm.
look like she's just so powerful that this man could do nothing. He could not think, he could not do anything. And usually if a man cannot think and cannot do anything, it's because the woman's body is controlling him. It's just
Hmm.
like when they make rules about what women can and cannot wear, it's because, men are so, weak-minded that they can't even control themselves. We can't even fathom that if we show our shoulders off, that a man could like, he's just going to run off the road all of a sudden and drive into like a store because it's like, oh, my shoulder was showing. I'm sorry.
God forbid you see a wrist.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
So the next question. So, what does a womanist critique reveal about the prophetic complicity in patriarchal violence, like particularly through Elijah's confrontation with Jezebel? So, this harkens back to when we talked about Elijah basically killed a bunch of prophets. Jezebel kind of did it back to him and that kind of thing. So, what do you guys think about that?
I think she really showed him that she was just not a punk and that you're not going to come over here and just do any old thing and then think you're going to get away with it. You kill my people, I'm definitely going to kill yours. And there's that.
Hmm.
And he couldn't handle a strong woman at all. I
Hmm.
mean,
Well, of course, because that shows how he just
it's
ran
kind of
away
like what
into
we
the
see today.
wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but a lot of times, and it's similar to what we see today, but a lot of times in Black churches and, other churches, even other minority churches, you see a lot of women. That's the
Yeah.
congregation. I would say probably a good like 80% of congregations are women,
Hmm.
and young girls. Like, yeah, it's patriarchal. So a lot of times, you do have the male at the top, as the preacher, father, whatever, you have a bishop at the top. But it is, women that are holding all of this together because if you remove them, then you have that 20% there that's male. Then what are
Yeah.
you doing? Like you could fill two rows, if that,
Hmm.
so, like let's consider, all of all of the aspects that go into this.
And if you think
Yeah.
about it, when it came down to like the civil rights
Mhm.
and even the Black Panthers, the women, they were
They
doing
were.
most of the work in the background.
Mhm.
And that's the part that's never mentioned, the hard work that we were doing in the background. But because the man was the face, that's the nickname that
Yeah.
we all remember.
Yeah.
See, and that's the same thing with Jezebel. She's doing all of this in the background, but because she had the power, she was a princess, she had that title, she was seen up front.
Yeah.
And that's why I said if she was a servant woman, the story probably would not have been known. And we probably, would not have seen her in the respect that we do. They were like, okay, Jezebel, okay, whatever, and they just
Like
keep on
just a
moving on.
servant, get away from
Yeah.
me. And the crazy thing is, like, before I started doing the research, I had no idea that she was a princess and then became a queen because you never, like, they don't put any respect on her name. Like,
None.
I
No,
say King
no.
Ahab because, and we know he's a king, but
Yeah.
I've never heard anyone say Queen Jezebel. And even in this conversation, we still didn't even say it. We were just like Jezebel. So we
Mhm.
are part of the problem.
That's because she's sis, bro. She's
Look at
family.
us oppressing her.
That's my cousin.
We still part of the problem,
No, we are.
but
You're right.
we're
I think
learning.
that's
We're learning and we're teaching.
Mhm.
Yeah,
yes.
she was definitely a queen for sure.
And so, like, I think with Elijah, like, it shows that even the prophetic figures in the Bible were used to basically uphold the oppression.
Yes.
So it's like, even though he is, saying his part and, fulfilling basically what we think he's supposed to fulfill within, the Bible, like, he's still a figure that basically um is oppressing women. And so even though, like, and he's supposed to be our hero, like that's how they frame it. He's our hero. Like even though he dies and then he passes it on to Elijah, like they're our heroes. And yet they're like you just have this woman who I feel like if she is the queen of Israel, then you should be showing some kind of respect also. I mean, is that not how that goes? Because he showed respect to her husband. But I understand about, the oppression of women and, she's the queen, but she's still a woman at the end of the day.
I was gonna say, like, I mean, if you're gonna talk about one queen, you gotta talk about all the queens, and you gotta go back to like
Mhm.
David,
Yep.
Saul,
Listen,
concubines.
one day we're going to come back and talk about David because I got a lot to say about this man.
Oof,
Don't even get me started on David.
David and
bro,
Paul.
David was a really weird journey for me because honestly, I used to want to be David. I thought this is the man who is after like God's heart, after God's heart. I
Mhm.
can't remember the exact phrase how they say it, but it's just like he is someone who is so close to God. And I was like, I want to be like that. I want to be someone who is so close to God. And then properly dissecting
Mhm.
his whole life story,
And it
all
doesn't
of
mean
his
that, yeah.
relationships.
And it doesn't mean that he was not after,
Mm.
a man after God's heart, but at the same time, it's like he was still a man with
You can make
sin.
so many mistakes
Yeah,
and be
with
so
sin.
close to God.
And so I think it's more of a story of redemption than
Yes.
anything else. Like I don't look at them as like, oh, you're a superhero, like you're a Superman, you're just flying across there, you can't harm anyone. I'm like, Superman literally, like that's what he does. He hurts people, like even though they're
Yeah.
villains,
Yeah.
but he's still hurting people. So at the end of the day, like, is it still good to hurt a villain, even though they're a person? Or, like you have to think of it like that. Just like when I teach kids, I'm like, it's still not right. Well, they hit me and I hit them back. But at the end, it's still not right. Hitting is not nice. So,
Pause
like,
real quick.
Sorry, Batman's one of my
okay.
favorite
Hold on.
superheroes.
Oh, I'm sorry. My
Hold
bad.
on. Okay, recording is in progress, guys.
Okay.
So
Dear.
basically, when we talk about Jezebel, so she is pretty much framed as the other. And we all know if you are the other in any kind of story, it's not usually going to go well for you. It's going to be like, usually the other, they're bullied, they're talked about, they're going to be treated like trash. I mean, in this instance, she wasn't treated like trash until kind of like the end when she was thrown out the window. But, and even that's a little crazy story. And with I always, like I said in the beginning, pay attention to that part where she was, putting on her makeup because that's always the part that we always hear about
Yeah.
with that. I'm always thinking like, okay, she's a queen. And before I knew she was a queen, I'm like, what is all this about a makeup? But if if you're a queen, like what do queens do besides when they get up, they got people putting on their dresses, they got people
Mhm.
putting on their little wig. If you wear one, you got people doing your makeup. So it's like
Mhm.
to me, like they put such a big deal on like her doing her makeup and everything. But like what is a queen to do? Because you have to look
Mhm.
your best at all times. I mean, even if I know I'm going to get murdered, I have to look my best. I'm the queen.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Cersei
And,
Lannister.
and
So it's like,
And I,
she knew it was
Cersei
coming.
Lannister
yeah,
dressed up.
and that seems like that was just a typical routine in her
Mhm.
life that they
Yeah.
kind of demonized and villainized.
and
Mhm.
like they always use that part as like she was trying to seduce the person that's coming to kill her. But if I'm trying to seduce a person that's coming to kill me, I'm not going to call them a traitor. I'm going to be
No.
like, "Hey, sexy," like that's what how that would
Mhm.
go. Like I'm not going to be like, "Hey, Zimri," like you traitor. Like so
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
part doesn't
yeah, because they
never made
fighting
any
words because you
sense.
already know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that part never made any sense to me why, of course, I mean, I know why they would ignore that like huge part where she's calling him a traitor, because of course it
Mhm.
doesn't fit into your narrative. And most people are not going to go back and read the story. They're just
Mhm.
going to listen to the pastor be like, and don't be a Jezebel. We want you all to be nice young ladies. So it's
Yep.
like, whatever fits the narrative
Mhm.
that you're trying to go with.
And I
Or
think a
we
lot
should
of
just
the
all be like
stories,
Jezebel.
yeah,
Like,
and I think a lot of the stories we have to consider the perspective. So we're typically only given one perspective
Mhm.
on a lot of the characters. Like even if you look at some villains in like I know we talk about like Superman, different things like that, Batman, Maleficent, Cruella de Vil. Like everybody has a backstory, and we see one perspective, but on the other
Yeah.
perspective, like she could have been, someone's, savior, someone like really helping the people.
Yeah.
Like I can't say like Cruella de Vil was helping the people. I mean, she was trying to kill the puppies, but I know like if you see like Maleficent's backstory, like she was a fairy. She
Yeah.
was nice. She, helped, she was
Mhm.
helpful. And then someone betrayed her, which hardened her. So it's like we only see it from one way. So I think
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to just digest it and just take it that one way because that's the only way that we've ever known it to be.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine if I came someplace like, moved to a whole different place that's a different culture. And I'm just trying to introduce you guys because that's like, intercultural. And I'm just
Mhm.
trying to introduce you to like my people, like, hey, these are my people. Because all the prophets were staying in the castle with them because it was like a famine. And then the next thing I know, like, you guys murder them all. And I'm like, what, what the hell? Like, why would you
mhm.
murder all my people? Good.
Can I knock out really quick?
Mhm.
So, one really interesting thing that I ran into when I was doing research on Baal and El. So, El traditionally is what the Hebrews called God, but it's
Mhm.
also like the Most High, right?
Yeah.
The King of Kings God. But it's also what everyone else in that area, so the Canaanites, also called their King of Kings, their gods. So, there's an interesting kind of conversation dialogue that happens where it's like, okay, so everyone believed in El, but because of patriarchy, because of this desire for monotheism, the Hebrews decided, or the Israelites decided that they're just going to worship El and no one else. And around the same time that this is all happening, Baal is considered a replacement of El. So this is something that's really common in a lot of polytheistic religions, where you have like this one kind of traditional, um, conservative, not really moving king, and someone comes in and replaces him.
Yep.
So I wonder sometimes, because obviously we can't go back in time, we don't know how this whole conversation went. But I wonder sometimes if her wanting to introduce Baal and how did she do it, right? What stories did she tell? What stories did they already know? The any advisors that of King Ahab, any advisors of Elijah, um, uh, uh, what is it that they already knew about all of the different religions? Because obviously traders are going to have stories, people in the markets are going to have stories. And
Mhm.
so if she's trying to introduce this person, they're like, well, did you know that according to her tribe back home, he basically kills El, so he killed our god. She's trying to kill our god. And how much did that impact um, the level of aggression and pushback that she got? How much did that impact how people perceived her because of what they knew, what the mythology was at the time?
And people are basically still like that. Like they will kill, they will do anything to uphold their religious beliefs. So it's like that's very understandable. I mean, not on my part because I wouldn't kill anyone, but for other people, that
Yeah,
someone might be like, okay, she's trying to take away our God. Like we can't let this happen, kind of thing. And I feel like that's almost the part that then what you were talking about, what Elijah would play. And like, he's that person that's like, she's trying to kill our God. We got to get her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we need to reclaim Jezebel and, stop stranking her and, own her leadership. And we need to own our own leadership. And yeah,
agreed. Queen Jezebel from now on. Don't let nobody call her
So
I,
are
Queen.
we?
I'll put that on my project. I'll put Queen Jezebel.
So
Yes.
are you
That's
saying
the
we're getting
name.
Queen Jezebel shirts and we're wearing them together? I can't
Yeah.
be by myself wearing it. Okay.
Listen, don't make me get someone to
100%.
make us these shirts
100%.
now.
I don't even want a shirt, y'all. I want a crop top.
with red lipstick on.
Yes.
So, as we close today's conversation, we are reminded that scripture is not just what's written, it's also what's interpreted, it's also what's remembered and what's repeated. So, reclaiming Jezebel for us is not about turning her into a saint, because let's be for real, she did get people murdered, but it's really
Mhm.
about telling the truth and seeing how, Black women, our strength, our resistance, our spiritual death has, too often been labeled dangerous or deviant. And it's also about asking those hard questions about faith traditions and finding sacredness in stories. So, whether you've been called Jezebel or not, or whether you've been silenced in the church, now this is about reclaiming our own voice and being who, we are in our fullness. So, as we leave this space, may we carry with us courage to ask the questions and the grace to hold complexity and faith to know that God is always moving in unexpected places. So remember to visit us at fourcolorgirls. Wow, I didn't even get to say the right thing.
The color girls who lead that.
fourcolortv.com. Bye.
See ya.